This is the Delta Huddle Podcast.
Hello, I'm Stefan Stenrus, and welcome to this episode of the Delta Huddle Podcast. Today's episode is all about the greatest resource your testing program can offer you, your testers. Yes, beyond all of the wonderful feedback and insights they provide during a project, testers have an immense amount of hidden value and opportunity for your entire testing program. While testers are essential for a successful project, that's really just the tip of the iceberg. Great testers stay with your program, they form the backbone of your testing community, and they also have the potential to become the vaulted brand evangelist. With the right amount of nurturing and engagement, these brand evangelists become a force multiplier for making sure you launch with confidence. Joining me to discuss how to find that hidden value are Dževad Kudić, COO of Talliez, and Chris Rader, VP of Marketing at Centercode. Dževad is a veteran in the user tester field, having run programs for early-stage startups, including Nest. His current company, Talliez, focuses on reinventing customer reviews to make them useful, engaging, and fun. And Chris's years of experience in user testing has helped some of the world's top brands build, optimize, and revitalize their customer and employee testing programs. Together, we discussed how to find and nurture quality testers, why brand evangelists are so important for great test programs, and how having a strong community leads to an even stronger impact on your products. There were a lot of fun anecdotes and stories shared in this episode, and I learned some excellent lessons about how testers can shape the direction of a product and even an entire company. And now, my conversation with Dževad Kudić and Chris Rader. Dževad and Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. Dževad, I wanted to start with you. Can you actually tell us more about Talliez and what you guys do over there?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me as well. This is really fun for me and exciting to be with you guys here. And with Talliez, actually, this is something that has really been a huge, passion of mine. Consumer insights and field testing has been a huge part of my career, and that sort of was what led to this. Is that over the many years, I've realized that the review process, sort of as it is today, is in my opinion broken. And I think a lot of people would. First you think, oh, it's just is what it is. It's out there. And I think when you're building a new company and creating a new product, it's exactly those kind of things that everybody's just gotten used to and expected to be that way. That's where I think the biggest innovations can be. And so at Talliez, we really are looking at sort of reinventing and figuring out how can we actually make the review process, but really it's all about feedback. How can we make feedback better, easier for consumers to do, to engage with companies? And then for companies, how can that be more useful, right? As opposed to being sort of this game that it is today with these reviews and fake reviews and the things that are going on. How can we fix that? And I think that's really what our focus is.
Excellent. Yeah. And you said that user testing and kind of this feedback from communities has been a big passion of yours. How does Talliez leverage user testing, and how have you leveraged it in the past with some of the companies that you've worked with?
Yeah, so at Talliez, that's actually one of the first things we thought about, actually, is when we founded the company, John and I, we immediately thought of Centercode. It was like one of our first thoughts. We were sitting down brainstorming, kind of thinking about, okay, what are our next steps? What do we set up? And obviously, besides the boring, like we need to set up the corporation, we need to, figure out what our team is going to look like, and we need to bring another founder in. We immediately thought of Centercode. And the reason really is because in our experience, you can build these products from the ground up. You don't really know how the market is going to react to them. And when you're building a product that's all about that market reaction, it's all about whether or not people want to post and talk about these things on our platform. Well, we needed to be able to get a sense of that with real people. And I think that's the part that I love the most about Centercode, is that it does feel like real people. It's not, this pushing buttons or QA type testing where it's, very regimented and controlled. There's some of that, obviously, and we utilize that as needed. But the bigger thing is I can get real reactions and I can adjust based on those things. So we wanted to do that as early as we could. And so it's already been a great success for us.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a sentiment that we get from a lot of our customers, is that they find Centercode as a tool at one company, and then that tool happens to follow them wherever they end up going. So some customers even go to a company and start a brand new beta program with Centercode as the foundation. So we're really glad that you were thinking of Centercode right from the get-go, like, hey, we're starting this new company. Centercode has to be at the center of it somehow, which is amazing.
Dževad, I mean, that's like your story, right? You started off with, it's funny, you mentioned field testing. Can you tell us your story of like, not how you came to Centercode specifically, but how you got into field testing?
Yeah, I should, it does sort of still feel like an industry term, which, I hate, but I've sort of settled on field testing because I don't like to use the term beta. I know that you guys have maybe some similar sentiments. I think for me, beta is just too confined. It definitely feels too techy. It definitely feels so much more like an internal process than it is a real human thing. Whereas really, when I started at Nest in the really early days and got involved in the field testing program there, it really wasn't about that. It was about real life, at the time, thermostat, as the first product. It was about putting it in real people's homes and seeing how it interacts, how it works. And without that type of testing, you could call it beta testing, but it's really not. We were making sure that there was a good representation and diversity in the population. We also had to make sure that there was the right HVAC systems and that, we could actually test things in a real home and watch the temperature change, watch user behavior, train algorithms, do those kind of things. And you can't really do that without a really thoughtful program where you're really building that community. And whenever I've tried to explain field testing to people, I actually end up comparing it much more to a pilot program, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, than I do with beta testing. I think it's really more about putting a real product experience out there. I love to think about it as intent, right? There's this intention that it's going to actually be operating for those testers like the consumer population would. But a bit early, right? Maybe there's some rough edges and there's some things that, aren't going to work that well. But I think really that's the difference for me. And sort of, the term we started to use more and more at Nest in the early days, especially, is field testing. And that's kind of what we landed on for a while.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, we've done like old studies like for many years now at this point, but there's a lot of fragmentation in that industry about what they call it and just some interesting stories about that. I remember talking with a company where they want to do they were testing a new product, and they were looking to build a plan for it. And I was recommending an alpha test based on their objectives, right? They really wanted to do real functionality stuff. They wanted to get in there quick, and they're like, "Can we not call it an alpha test?" And I'm like, "Sure. Why does it matter?" And they said, "Well, if we were to tell any of our executives we're an alpha, they would be they would be a little bit upset because they'd feel like we're further along, right?" So like when you say things like alpha and beta, they tend to also align to positions in product development. And when you think of field, like it gets out of the idea of product development and gets into, no, it's where you're going into the field. Like when you do field marketing, when you do these field testing, it's like, oh, you're getting out in the field. Other names like friendly user trials, they're trials of it, or pilots. They get away from the aspect of the product development. But there's so many companies that just, they have their preferences of names, and that kind of just speaks kind of volumes to that fragmentation. And the problem that we encounter at Centercode is how do we unite everybody under, like, we can't come up necessarily with a common term to do this, so we have to be able to speak to everybody. And we're hoping that our Delta testing is kind of this evolution of what that concept of beta testing more so, right? Like beta testing and field are probably very similar in the way they're run, but we're kind of trying to unite everybody under the term Delta testing for a better way to do it.
Yeah, I found that to be true, right? Once you land on something that is different than what the industry is used to, you kind of have to make up a new name for it, right? Because there is so much stigma and all these things that are around the current terminology. It's funny, I was smiling as you were talking about that because we had that experience as well when we were acquired by Google at Nest, and that was a huge thing because it's obviously a very established company, very large company, has its processes, and their big thing is sort of dog food, and then you start to go earlier and people were like, actually, well, this is actually fish food, right? Because it's not quite, so you start to get into these things, and for me, it was very interesting. I think sometimes the conversation was more about the terminology and like where we were, what that meant to the company as to where we were. as opposed to like, I try to keep bringing that conversation back to no, what, like, why are we doing this? Just why? Like, forget about where we are in the program. What are we trying to get out of this? What is the goal? What are we getting from this? And that's why I kind of kept trying to bring them back to that more encompassing field testing term. And maybe for you guys, Delta testing. And I'll have to sit with that a little bit and kind of take it in. I've obviously heard you guys say Delta a lot. It's something that I'm still so used to these terms as well. So it's funny how that really starts to confine us, I think. So I try to bring it back and just remove the terminology as often as I can.
I think the why behind testing is incredibly important, right? And maybe sometimes you discover a couple of those whys along the way, right? I think a lot of people look at field testing or user testing or beta testing as, hey, we need to find the issues and the bugs and the things that are wrong. And maybe sometimes neglect like, hey, what are the really cool ideas that our community can give us? Or, hey, what are the pieces of praise that people are saying, right, that we can use to really kind of prop up our product? And kind of in that same vein, what are some of the big impactful pieces of feedback, Dževad, that you found in some of your tests? What are some of the things that really opened your eyes and you said, wow, this is incredible. Like we need to incorporate this into the product?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two types of it, right? I think the first type is sort of what you're talking about. It's sort of the required type. You just have to do it. That was what made approving field tests at Nest, for instance, so easy, because we knew that you have to put the product in a real home. Otherwise, algorithms don't work correctly. The system isn't actually being controlled. The wires have to actually touch and connect for you to know whether or not the hardware is of right quality. We had in our testing program, thermostats were installed, in the deep south where it's super humid and also super dry and arid areas. And part of that was to get different systems, but also was like, how did it impact the materials? How did it impact how the devices worked? And that was true not just for thermostat, but for like outdoor cameras and anything you can imagine, right? You start to have these environmental things that you can't control. So there's that section of it that was very impactful in that it's so impactful that it was literally what made it possible, right? I do think, to get a high quality product out there that works in all those scenarios, you really care about that. Well, you have to do that to be able to get that quality up. And not every company does that, right? Some of them do just sort of QA test, you test things in a lab, looks like it's working, and you put it out there and you kind of hope it all works out, right? So I think that one's more obvious. I think the more interesting one is those scenarios that I think you alluded to, Stefan, is that there's scenarios where you just don't know what you're going to get. You put it out there and you don't know how the reaction is going to be. I think for me, one of the big ways in the very beginning of a test is actually in recruiting, right? So there's all this market research the company has done to try to figure out, okay, who is our customer? What do they look like? You make these user profiles and you think about why they like your product, why they would like your product, and you do all this research. And then oftentimes when you get to this testing stage and you're recruiting for your first test of that product, that's when you really find out, okay, who really is interested in this, right? And there's definitely been times where, a company that I'm working with is adamant sort of that, no, we have this customer, we want you to find 250 people that look like this person, right? And I always push back against that, and sometimes I win, sometimes I lose. But what ends up happening is that you go after that customer, and sometimes they're not as interested as you thought they were. It doesn't necessarily meet their needs. It wasn't actually that exciting for them. And that's been some of the more impactful things in the past, is that you get to that recruiting stage and you realize, wait a minute, there's actually this other group of people that are like way more engaged, way more interested in what you're doing, have these ideas for how to use the product and what it should be to them. And that's been, usually the first impactful part of any testing program I've done has actually been this really early stage sort of market validation and being able to kind of go back to the marketing team and the executive team and say, hey, wait a minute, we're seeing something strange here. We should be maybe thinking about who we're marketing this to. And that happened, at Noon was a smart lighting company. We built this system and really meant for it to be more sort of DIY installation and something. And, we had testers that were totally comfortable doing that and were able to, it's a high voltage wiring for your lighting, but they were comfortable doing it. But that doesn't mean they were all comfortable, even if they were very tech savvy and they were sort of like what other products would consider very much so early adopters. There was something about that electricity that definitely put some people off. And so, the company actually ended up making a pivot to a B2B style sales method. And then all of a sudden, the website, the marketing, who are actual customers that we're marketing this to became sort of these installers and these different shops that would be doing these things instead, right? And so it just sort of completely changed how the company was operating. And so it's stuff like that that I think is super impactful. And you can make all these educated guesses. I think the cool thing for me and why I love working on this stuff is it's reality. It's the first time that you actually get out there and you're in front of real life, real people, and sometimes they just love it and they run with it, and other times they just go meh, and you kind of have to like try to figure that out and adjust. And I think that those have been the times where it's really impacted things.
That's super interesting. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I come from market research, like one of my backgrounds in research itself. But what you're explaining is like product market fit. Right, so you do research to establish like these user problems, and then you get a makeup of what they would look like, and then you align your product and your solutions to those problems. And you're saying, okay, there's the product market fit, and you could establish this months, maybe even further, like a year in advance of that. And it's kind of hard pressed that your market's not going to change in that time frame, right? So while you're building it, you kind of need to keep up on that research and refresh that data. And there's a point where you actually develop your product and it's ready, and you get to actually validate that product market fit. And that's huge, right? It's before it's going out, because you don't know exactly. Like everything is kind of an assumption. You're doing interviews and surveys, and you're like, yeah, they have these problems, and yeah, they'd be interested in our solution, and we're totally going to nail this. And then we do some, prototypes, and like, yeah, cool. But once it gets in their home or in their office and they start using it, that's when you get a sense of, what are they liking? What are they not liking? And does this actually solve that problem? Is there some other solution that's solving it? And it's just interesting. And I think that longevity of testing is important, that you're not entering product development saying, okay, we're going to do one beta or one field test and that's it. It's like this idea of you're going to be reaching out to customers throughout, like during this whole cycle. You don't want to have gaps.
Yeah, I mean, it's a time machine in some ways, right? So, you put things out into the real world and you actually launch it. Well, then you have, the market reaction to it. Well, everybody's like, oh, well, if only we had a glass ball and we could kind of see how they would react. Well, it's like, well, actually, this is a version of that. And it's not perfect. It's not going to get it 100% right every time. But I found it to be way more accurate and way more like what actually happened at launch than not. It's so often that I've been able to have a presentation to sort of summarize how the test went at these different stages. And definitely at every company right before launch, we would sort of do a final, like, okay, this is what we learned. This is what happened. Like, this is what we should be prepared for. We've gotten customer support ready. We've done as much as we can do. And now we're waiting. It's been, the top 10 end up being the top 10. Maybe they move around a little bit in priority, or, something happens that we didn't expect or something. But generally speaking, it's correct. So you get this time machine and you can actually say, okay, what should we do about this? And I think the bigger struggle for me has actually been to convince people internally that, no, this really is something we should listen to. There's a lot of internal bias that goes on. There's a lot of sort of feeling that we know, something that the consumer doesn't know. And oftentimes we do, visionaries and innovators, they do know something that consumers don't know. But I think the problem with that is that doesn't mean they're ready. And I think that's one thing that field testing can really do, is help you see whether or not your market is actually ready for this innovation. And I've definitely hit scenarios where that's happened, right? Where we built a great product. It worked really well. It was very user-friendly. It had the right idea. When you talk about it in a room, it's like, that makes total sense. Of course, why would you want to walk around to your different lights and click them all on and off, like, all around your room, when you could just go to one place and control them all together? That's so obvious. And I think if you're talking to people, that's obvious. But then human nature doesn't work that way, right? There's, people are so used to it and it's a part of their daily habits that they're still clicking these other switches, even though they don't need to. But you got to bring them along that journey. And I think that's something that, you can really capture those things in these field testing programs, and then really use that to figure out, how do we bring them along that journey? Do we need to change something? Do we need to do things? And there was definitely times where we were able to do that. At noon, we decided to actually make it so that you could dim the lights at those individual locations. Again, it didn't make sense to us from a user experience point of view, but because people were so used to it, we didn't want to completely upend their defined habits We wanted to bring them along and eventually get them. And this was what would happen. Eventually, over time, they would stop doing it. They would stop going to those other switches that are the sort of the remote ones. And they would start to use our room director that we had that kind of controlled everything from one place. So, we were able to find that. Had we not, we probably would have launched without that feature, and you get a lot of 1-star reviews saying, hey, this is like, why can't I do this? Why I can't turn off my light? This makes no sense. I got to get this thing out of my house, right? Because you have to bring them on that journey.
And you have to have it soak like that, right? Like you have to be able to see that over time. You can't get that kind of insight from a survey. You can't get that kind of insight from a 30-minute call with someone looking at a prototype or a screen. Like it has to be in their lives, kind of injected there to see what the behavior is going to be. And that's,
exactly. Yeah.
Value.
And the fact that the audience gets to kind of be a part of this product development journey, right? If you're developing in a bubble, right, and you're just relying on, hey, we have this amazing idea, and leaving it in a vacuum, like you said, Dževad, you get to Amazon and suddenly there's a bunch of 1-star reviews. So I think that's one of the really fun things about field testing or Delta testing or whatever we want to call it, is that the audience kind of becomes a central part of like the journey from ideation all the way to launch. Speaking of the audience, obviously you've had a lot of experience in the testing field, and it seems like that experience has kind of shaped how you recruit. What are some of the main things that you look for when recruiting? What identifies as like, hey, this person is going to be a great tester for this product?
Yeah, no, I think I kind of alluded to or kind of spoke to the first point, which is I actually try to give some sense of diversity. So looking at the general, the U.S. market, let's say if it's the U.S., we did some international stuff. I've done some international things as well, so obviously it's a little bit different. But using the U.S. market as an example, I'm going to take a look at that a little bit more broadly. That doesn't mean that I would recruit for, equal to the U.S. Census, right? Like I'm getting exactly the right mix of all that kind of stuff. We bias it, obviously, because I think you can make educated guesses. You can kind of know if you have sort of a techie product, or if you have sort of a home goods type product. You can definitely make some smart, educated guesses and make sure your community has the right set of people. But one way that we've been able to do it in the past is to put that marketing message out there into that recruitment and see what you get, right? And so I think that's always been an interesting thing. And Chris, I'd love your thoughts on this. But for the marketing team, that's been awesome for them, is because they can actually put that marketing message out there, an early version, something that's a few sentences, and really test it for the first time and just see sort of like who responds to this and why did they respond to it and why are they interested in it. And that's why that second step is really sort of having that survey ready. That I've talked to the marketing team, the executive team. We kind of work together to figure out, okay, what is it that we want to know about this population of potential customers, these people that might be interested in our thing? What do we want to know about them? Some of it's obvious demographic things, but a lot of it is also just sort of the simple questions of like, why are you interested in this test? What made you click this and apply for this? And I think those have been really interesting ways to kind of help choose those testers. A lot of it for me really has been sort of their level of engagement, excitement in actually just applying, right? Because they haven't gotten anything yet. They have an interest, they have something that they want to bring to that. And, one of the standard questions, and I think you guys have it in your templates even, is, what makes you a good fit for this test, right? And I think those have been always very illuminating. You can kind of see and you can hear really how people connected to your product idea. And I think that, that's always been a good way to kind of get started. So again, I try to put the marketing message out there, see who comes in, and then take a look through that and see sort of what their comments are and why they're interested in joining.
That question is like such a genius move. I'm not sure who at Centercode. I'm imagining it was Luke, our CEO, came up with the idea. But that single question does so many things. It can, when you ask an open-ended question in the survey, because I don't recommend you asking like 15 open-ended questions. That's going to kind of just kill your response rate. But when you ask something like, well, why do you think you're a good fit for this test? You get things like you're mentioning, like fit, like are you a fit audience for this? You get beta tester fit or fit to be a tester, right? Like, why are you interested in getting feedback? Are you well spoken? Are you like decent at giving feedback? Can I understand what you're saying well enough? It just offers like the attention to detail. So they're giving me more data in here. And someone that says, I just want a free product, you're just like, nah, yeah, you don't seem like you're going to be a good tester or necessarily a good fit for this product. It's a wealth of information in that. Now it's important to ask those questions. And when you are screening for an audience, is to throw that single question out there. Why are you a good fit for this test itself?
So absolutely, yeah, a lot of stuff to unpack there. When I've applied on a couple tests there, that question has always been like the thing I focus on the most, because I feel like everything else is pretty standard. Like, hey, have you used the product before? What's your level of skill, etc. Those questions most people have a pretty solid answer to, but you're going to find those really insightful kind of insights about a person just by reading that long form right there. At the top of the podcast. Go ahead. Sorry. I
have a quick story that's fun. It was a test they were running. And it's funny. It was for a barbecue. So we're running tests for a new smart barbecue, and I was going through the application, and I was running this test, and we have that, why you're a good fit, and I got this like beautiful response. It hit on so many different levels. It was a firefighter looking to get onto the test, and he was explaining the situation of like why he's in the market for a new grill, and why he thinks the benefits of something smart related would be useful to him, because he's got to be able to be somewhere else at the same time and be able to control a barbecue if he needs to go on an emergency. And he gave me like this like very elaborate response. I'm like, man, this is wonderful. All that from just a single question. Like, firefighters are known for kind of being grillers for the most part. They're known for needing to be away from the grill. They can't sit in front of it for countless hours if they're actually grilling, and they need to be able to control it at any point. And they're concerned with safety. And it was just a home run of a qualification. That's like, it's interesting. Like when you dig into that, the value of that tester was so high. Like their feedback was invaluable to the company when we got the perspective from someone like that. So that question led to a great tester, which led to great feedback, which leads to a better product, which leads to more sales, more revenue, all that fun stuff.
It's like it opened up the Pandora's box of like, oh my God, we had this incredible tester here, and we would have no idea that this person would have provided this much insight if we hadn't asked that question.
Yeah, if it was just multiple choice questions, I probably wouldn't, unless I'm asked specifically what industry they're in, what their job title is, but I would have not made that connection directly. And I don't think the company itself would have like profiled that person specifically. Right. And that's, I think, what Dževad's saying. It's like diversity. Like, we're not going to hit the full extent of an audience. Whenever I've done personas or market segmentation, there's like a breadth, right? Like they give you, 20% of the market looks like this, 40% of the market looks like that. And then they give you ranges of things, but it's not exhaustive. It's not comprehensive. Firefighter wasn't, the niche in there, because that's a very small market, but it's a segment of a market. And it's, that segment can talk to other segments and convince them, right? And that's why you kind of need to have some diversity in your tester base.
And marketing, right? That's a great story. I mean, that's a marketing story right there, right? And that's something that, I've seen used in my tests as well, where I'll tell them one of these stories from one of those users, just like you're talking about, right? Here's this person, here's what they look like. They had this really interesting way that they were using the system to, safety or whatever the story is. Those are so much more impactful. And there's been a number of times where the marketing team is like, yes, please. Like we would love to talk to that person. We would love to profile them. We did that on a number of occasions where these real users were actually able to come in and sort of, tell their story in a marketing way. And that was super valuable to the company. And like you said, not a part of the test plan whatsoever, right? But really impactful.
The storytelling component, like data is data, and then this is like a thing, they talk about that qualitative side, being able to dig into a story. When you walk into an executive meeting and you're explaining the results from your test itself, and you get to latch on to a story like that and then back it up with some data that you captured, like that is impact right there. That will get decisions made on the data, rather than, yeah, we ran into a couple bugs, but when the grill's on fire and smoking and a firefighter said it, like there's a concern there, right? Like there's like, oh, okay, there's a problem there. That's not some Joe Schmo that's trying to grill that did something weird and threw a bunch of oil on it or something like that. Like that's someone that's smart enough to make good decisions and something.
Yeah, in hindsight, having someone who is hyper aware of objects that could or could not be on fire is probably amazing for a grill test. Yeah. So I definitely speaks to kind of hidden value there, right? Kind of one of our big topics today. And at the top of the podcast, I kind of mentioned, hey, how do we find that hidden value? Who are these brand evangelists? Who are these people who are really going to speak to the product and whatnot? And the question I want to pose to both of you is, how do you define the term brand evangelist? What is a brand evangelist in your eyes?
I'm happy to start. Yeah. No, I love that question. And I think, it's another industry term, I really like to define it as someone that actually truly, lives and breathes your product, just like you do. I think, usually it should be that inside your company should be your first set of brand evangelists, right? The people that truly believe in your mission and believe in what you're doing and why you're doing it, and believe that product is the right fit for it. I think for me, testers that are brand evangelists sort of fit that mold as well, right? They really care about it. When they give feedback, it may be critical feedback. There may be criticism in there, but it's constructive. It's because they actually care. They really want to see that product impact their lives, the lives of their family and friends. And so they really start to be that evangelist for you, right? And, I've seen this so many times with all the different product tests, where that user wants another one and buys a second one, gets one for their mom, gets one for, so you start to hear these stories. And I think, when you go to define something like this, I think it's, really seeing that type of, organic just love for the product, and where they're really, putting it out there and recommending it. And I think that, that really is, because they believe in the mission and they believe in the brand. And I think that belief, I think, is, I guess, how I would define it.
It's a lot of passion, right? Like I was walking through an outdoor mall, I think it was just like a couple days ago. And on one of the storefronts, there's a couple of like posters, and it says up there brand ambassadors, and it's got like these like influencers. I think Chris Pratt was on one of them. And they have a few of these people that are kind of advertising brand ambassadors. Now they're being paid, right? Like those people are being directly paid to do this, but they're leveraging their influence. When I think of a brand evangelist or someone that is kind of being the voice for your product, it's someone that's doing that, but not in a selfish manner, right? Like they're advocating for the product, like you said, they believe in the mission. Right. Like I worked at a company called Western Digital, and I said this for years. Like I bled blue. I totally drank the Kool-Aid, and and WD was blue. The colors were blue for context. But I love the hard drives. I love them. And I thought they were such better quality than the competitors. And since moving on, I still buy Western Digital products. I still invest in them. I still recommend them to people. I'll leave great reviews. And what's interesting is when you think of somebody that is, a beta tester who's investing their time in development to give you feedback, to help you better the product for other people, like they're not getting necessarily a monetary reward for it. Like it could be, you get a new product, or you get to, maybe you get a gift card or something like that. So it may be slightly monetary, but imagine, 4 weeks of time and you get a $50 gift card. Like the time is well worth the money spent. But that person's going to take that investment into the product, help you in product development, tune it, make it great. And then after launch, they still have that investment. They still invested their time into the product. So they're going to be more willing to go talk to people about the product after the fact. Like, oh yeah, it was I enjoyed testing it. It was great. It has these benefits. They can even help with aspects of support on it. So if like, oh yeah, I saw that issue, here's how we can kind of work around it. And you think of like this single person that doesn't work at the company, invested in the product, helping people after the fact. Now that's obviously pending you have a great project experience with them. If you have an awful project experience with them, those beta testers aren't going to turn into brand evangelists. They'll probably be a little more negative towards you or the brand itself. But that passion is beta testers. Good beta testers are passionate. Good beta testers that have a good passionate team running the test and they're interested and engaged. Like that's the recipe for creating a big brand evangelist following in your product.
Yeah, I like what you just hit on there, Chris, right? Because it is that second part that makes it important. And oftentimes, the conversation starts the other way, right? Which is like, how can we get them to do this or that? Or can we get them to give us reviews? Or it's like, well, wait a minute, like, what are we giving them? What is the value that we're providing them? And I think that was a huge part of it is you do have to care. You have to really be listening to them, number one. I think for me, actually listening to them, making sure that they're heard, and that they can see that the things that they're saying actually leads to actions, right? It turns into a feature that they mentioned, a bug that they called out. And sometimes they were more minor, right? There was definitely times where I pushed really hard internally to get something that was really bothering maybe just one or two testers. But because they were so good, they were those brand evangelist type users. I just wanted to get it fixed for them because I wanted to show them that we cared, that I cared, and that the company would do something about that. And we did on a number of occasions. And like you said, that does create brand evangelists. And I know for sure that the value we received from them, was 10x, 100x, for some of them. And, there's the obvious examples where I could point out, again, testers that would actually buy a second thermostat or a third thermostat for their home. We gave them one, but that doesn't mean that they needed to do that. And they weren't trying to get free stuff, like you said. They were really they loved and fell in love with the product. And then they would, the other thing I think is funny is, testers that sort of are like, here's this person, I really know they'll be a good tester and add them to the program. But will also, in conversations will tell me that like, no, they would never add that person, right? Because like it's these things where they do care and they want to know that there's value being given. And so we would see that all the time when people would want to buy additional devices. And I know for sure, anecdotally, obviously not, the data is harder to get, but I know that they were talking to their neighbors about it, showing it off when people came home. And that's it. You mentioned after the test is over. That's actually a reason why at Nest, for instance, and every other company, we've always pushed to have those products be something where they get a production version at the end. Because instead of having the mentality of the company being, we're doing 8 weeks of testing, 2 months, 3 months of testing. We did really long tests actually for most of them. And then at the end of it, it's like, bring it back. We never wanted the tester to get the sense that this wasn't theirs. We wanted them to feel that ownership so that they would start to really care about it and make decisions and feedback based on the fact that they're owners, that they really, it's theirs, right? And so, we would always do that and make sure that they kept the product at the end of it. And that becomes, walking, brand evangelists for you that continues even if they leave the program. So I think that's a huge point that you make, which is that it can't, your plan can't be to end, and just say, we're done now. We did it. We checked that box. It has to be that you're creating a community of people. And when you create a community, I think that's where you can then sort of pick out those people in the community that are the leaders. And I think those leaders are the brand evangelists, right? They're the people that are kind of really contributing in those, A+ ways, right? A little bit more than others.
Yeah, it's funny. I have another, little story to tell because I'm chock full of stories. But at a previous company, there was 2 testers. I still know these testers' names to this day. I know these 2 testers. It's funny. They're both named Tony. I won't say their last names, but their first names were Tony. We'd walk into a bug review. So we'd do like weekly bug reviews to go over what bugs, were found by testers, and what bugs were found in like QA and all that fun stuff. And we'd make decisions on which things we were going to kind of address for the next release. So there's bugs that we'd bring up. And sometimes the engineers would ask what tester submitted it. And the name, if they heard one of the Tonys being named, they would just say, okay, we'll just address that. These people put so much attention to detail, so much time into the feedback that they were putting in. The developers had relationships with them. Like developers would love to go into our program and just communicate with them and say, hey, can you get this information, or can you help us out with this? Can you test this out? And those people, those Tonys would go help other testers in situations. They would triage the feedback for me when I was doing, the beta test stuff. They would help say, hey, other tester, you need this information, or have you tried this, or can you do this? And it's just like, man, they're providing support in the project. They're doing this. They would send us pictures of all the products that they had that were all from the company. Like, it was amazing. They like you said, they wanted to buy more products. They were so invested in it. it was such a beautiful thing to have those passionate, curious people inside a test. And like I say it all the time, like, you know them by name. It's, you know, like the Cheers reference, like I knew these testers. I can.
Yeah. I mean, look, I would get on the phone, right? I would get on the phone with people. I'd be driving in the traffic and the Bay Area going home, and would call, you know, somebody that had given a piece of feedback, and sometimes just have conversations. And again, that goes back to being heard. I think those Tonys that you mentioned, they knew they were being heard. They could see that, they could watch it change. And that's what created Brand Evangelists. And like you said, not only do they make the purchases, but they are certainly telling their friends and family. They're really recommending the products. And I think that you can't really put a price on that. That's what every company is trying to get those people. They're trying to find ways to find them and get them, you know, to really be doing this. And you mentioned influencers, right? Earlier, that's the thing, you know, trust in influencers is going way down. You know, people really don't believe influencers. At the end of the day, they know they're being paid for it. They can smell it. You know, in the market research that we've been doing for Talliez, actually, that's, you know, something we commonly hear from people is that, like, it just, you can tell. You can tell when you look at a review or a piece of feedback or a video online, even if the person doesn't say, you know that they kind of are that way. And I think the thing that, and it's not criticism, and I'm trying to find a better word for it, but you know, those Tonys providing that feedback, they were willing and wanted to say, hey, this isn't going well. And I think that's the other key thing too. A brand evangelist, because they care, is also willing to tell you when you have the booger sticking out of your nose. Like they want to tell you, like, hey, something's not right here, and you know, you want to listen to them. So I think that's the other thing that's missing from that, is that you can have these influencers, you can have people that are promoting your product, but I think the brand evangelists are actually willing to say, hey, something's wrong. Please fix this, right? And so I think that's key.
It's interesting. I think maybe the lesson here is that instead of paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to an influencer, just go find those Tonys and nurture a community around them, because the marketing potential there is immense. But I think
there's definitely value in it. It's like a collection of things, right? Like you might need influencer marketing. You might need these brand evangelists, the word of mouth. A lot of it can depend on the product or the market that you're going into, because you could want to look at multiple data points. Like you could look at Amazon reviews and Best Buy reviews. This is old at this point, but I'd walk into a Best Buy and I go look at these products. I got to, see products. Fun walking into a store and seeing products. And I'd pull out my phone and I'd scroll through the Amazon reviews of whatever I'm looking at, right? I go look at the positive reviews, I go look at the negative reviews, but I'm using that review. And then I might, open up a browser and do like, a rated review from something like CNET, right? And I get that's more of like technically, like some of those people get paid or incentivized to do reviews, but you review them, you take a little bit of each of them, and you get this you get a position, right? Of like, okay, this is what I believe, this is what I don't believe, here's what's biased and unbiased, rather than just going one source, that's it. If you only relied on influencer marketing, it might be a little rough. But I think most consumers are evaluating purchases with some intent behind it to, validate that they can trust the information that they're getting.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right. I think I see those influencers as more of a discoverability thing, right? You're trying to get in front of an audience and introduce them to this new thing. So it is sort of very happy and fluffy, and it's sort of, it's more marketing than I think it is a true review or a sort of referral, right? It's really more of a marketing opportunity to introduce you to this thing. Well, then the user has to go and determine it. As opposed to brand evangelists, if it's someone that you trust and know, and they come and they tell you, like, you're talking about thermostats, and like, no, you got to get the Nest one because I've had it for 2 years. Like, here's my experience with it. Here's what's going on. That's gold, because that person really isn't going to do as much of that research that you're talking about because they have that source. And then I think everything else is sort of in between that, right? Like the online reviews and the CNETs and the articles and the things are just different sort of gradients of that same problem. Is you want to get people to understand it. But, again, I think the hard part with those things, like you mentioned it, Chris, is trying to understand what's actually real and what's what you can trust, and you kind of sniff test it and go, I believe whatever at the end of it. So you take in all this stuff, and then you just kind of have to make a gut feeling on it. So I think it's so challenging. I have a hard time not talking about this because that's where my passion is. But yeah, it's a real problem. I see these. I have a funny story as well. I'll tell you real quick. I see that all the time. my son had this game he was playing on the iPad, and I looked at the reviews because I was going to download it for him. And, the review was like so clearly fake. It was like Marco da Vinci was the writer of the review, and it was clearly bot written. It was talking about how immaculate and perfect the product was, and it said it was really funny. It said all humans and animals should use this app, and I was just like, well, like, who is this review helping? How do you get any value out of this? So I think that's where really I think finding these other ways to do that and to really get that value out of those things, because everybody really just wants to know which product is right for me. What's going to work for me? What am I going to like? What am I not going to regret buying? And have frustrations and all that stuff afterwards. And so people are just trying to figure out how to do that. And I think, that's, going back to the brand evangelist, not to get too far off topic, but that's where really you can kind of learn about that and try to understand why do they love it so much. I think that has great marketing potential too, and it can help other customers as well. So,
absolutely, yeah. We're coming up on time here. One question I wanted to ask the both of you. We like to use the term tech optimism here at Centercode, mainly to refer to our belief that technology can make everyone's life better at the end of the day. So what are some of the pieces of technology that you're really excited and optimistic about right now? And I'll start with you, Dževad.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I'm one of the biggest optimists that you can kind of know, and I kind of always just look at life that way. And I think we always, as humans, have the ability to do these wonderful things. And having worked in technology and seeing that sort of upend different things, it's an industry that I'm not in it whatsoever, but you might be surprised to hear me say climate tech, actually. I think as the problem gets more serious and as we kind of work on it, I think, sometimes you have these huge problems that need to be solved, and you have all of a sudden all this energy to solve it. And I think when that happens, similar to other events that have happened in our history, civilizations and whatnot, it's oftentimes those things that then lead to these like technological booms, right? And it's not always directly related to that thing, but I think, you create all this, technology. How does it then help other people? How does it impact, clean energy and water and everything else around the planet? And I think there's a lot of things that could actually come from that I'm very optimistic will actually improve lives for people. And I think that's one thing technology, I think, can still do a better job of. It's made our lives more convenient. It's made our lives, easier in a lot of ways and more fun, certainly in a lot of ways. But I think that's one sort of taking care of those basic needs for a lot of people on the planet, I think is actually, I'm very optimistic about it.
Yeah. I would love for my answer to be that moral and ethical, because it sounds really nice. I've been talking to Stefan about this, and I'm raving about it all over Centercode right now. It's AI. Like, I am just, I don't know how to handle this. My mind is turned to mush, having a hard time sleeping. But yeah, that specifically, we've done a lot of the like DALL-E and just the AI generation, image generation and stuff. And it's mind blowing. Like, it is to a point where it's scary and cool and amazing and beautiful and so intelligent, like writing songs that have my kids' names in it, right? Like, that's super neat. I created a kid's story last night at like 2 a.m. about my son and his monster trucks. And I was just like, this is the coolest thing ever. I could probably talk on this for hours, and I have already for days now. But I will end with I'll end with AI is kind of my where I'm seeing optimism. I want to be optimistic about it, I think.
Yeah. So all we need to do is just take the AI and the climate tech and just combine them together, so we can ask it, hey, how do we solve the climate problem? And it just gives us a nice
sure it will answer
right
you.
there.
Well, I think that's the thing, right? Is it can think outside the box now, or at least it can think in a different way than we can, and how it sort of just supplements all these things. No, I think that what you're speaking about is really one of those underlying technologies that sort of changes all the industries, right? So I think it's actually quite important.
Well, there we go. So, Dževad, Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. A lot of excellent insights, a lot of really fun stories to share with the audience. Once again, thank you so much, and really appreciated having you on.
Thanks, Tom.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Delta Huddle Podcast. If you enjoyed today's podcast, subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Audible. And if you want to learn more about how Delta testing can maximize the impact of your user tests, head to Centercode.com. You'll find a host of resources from ebooks to webinars to help you get started. This has been the Delta Huddle Podcast by Centercode. We'll see you in the next episode. Happy testing.